Good afternoon, and welcome to our Canadian Club of Ottawa event for the day, The New Office, Remote Work and the Future of Commercial Real Estate. I'm Heather Bakken, President of the Canadian Club of Ottawa. While we're meeting on a virtual platform today, I would like to acknowledge the rights of the Indigenous people to the land each one of us is on. For the Canadian Club of Ottawa, it is the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin. Anishinaabe are the original inhabitants of the territory where the Parliament buildings overlook Ottawa, which is just downstream from one of the most sacred places for Indigenous peoples, Miigwech. A few housekeeping notes before we go on, and this is mostly to do with tech and how to move forward with the Q&A, because we'd love for you to engage in a discussion at the end of the event. If your internet quality is poor at any point during the event, click here. There's a click here to switch stream button, which will lower your video bandwidth, but make sure that the audio remains stable so you can listen in and not miss a beat. If you're having any other technical issues, there is a request help bubble at the bottom right corner of your screen, which you should see. If you have a question for something other than the Q&A, please send an inquiry, and the response will be sent to the email you used to register for today's event. To ask a question, simply click on the questions tab, write in your question, hit send. It will be sent to, it won't be shown on the site, but it will be sent to our moderator to get to at the end when we go to the Q&A. And also we will get to as many questions as we can. So hopefully you can stick with us until the end, and we will address any of the insights that you want our panel to further share. We're grateful to the Canadian Club of Ottawa's corporate sponsors for the season, which are the Royal Bank of Canada, RBC Royal Bank, and Shaw Communications. We are also grateful to our gold sponsors, Welch LLP, Strategy Corp, and TD Bank, and to our media partners, Impact Public Affairs, iPolitics, The Hill Times, and the Ottawa Business Journal. Now, a message from one of those media partners.
Hi, I'm Michael Curran from the Ottawa Business Journal. Now celebrating its 25th anniversary, OBJ is a leading source of local news and business information. OBJ is also a proud supporter of the Canadian Club of Ottawa and its mission to provide our community's business leaders with context, perspective, and a deeper level of understanding. Please stay tuned for a draw to win a VIP subscription to OBJ.
Thank you very much, Michael. Now to today's event. The COVID-19 pandemic has had a major impact on work and the workplace for Canadians across the country. The crisis has accelerated the technology that enables people to work remotely. But today, many businesses are reconsidering the importance of a physical presence and place in workspace planning. As we move closer to herd immunity through vaccination, the question is not just whether we'll continue to work remotely, but to what extent. Major Canadian businesses have decided to leave their physical office space behind, and many have strong opinions on how they would like to continue working in the post-pandemic environment. Today's panel will feature a well-rounded discussion from executives at the heart of the post-pandemic office. It's my pleasure first to introduce your moderator. Awais Osman is an associate with Gowling WLG and the Vice President of Programming with the Canadian Club of Ottawa. Awais has experience in handling complex commercial litigation and arbitration matters focusing on contractual disputes. He is also a subject matter expert on product and professional liability at Gowling WLG. Awais is passionate about public affairs, and I'm proud to mention he has been a member of the Canadian Club of Ottawa's Board of Directors since 2017, and I can't think of anyone better suited to lead the discussion for today's panelists. Over to you, Awais.
Thank you, Heather, for that very kind introduction, and good afternoon, everyone. We have a very interesting conversation ahead of us on the future of the workspace with three exceptional thought leaders. We're joined today by Andrew Reeves, Joanne Varvaro, and Susan Black. Very briefly, Andrew Reeves is an award-winning architect and founder of Linebox Studio, which has designed over 1 million square foot of office space across Canada. Joanne Varvaro is the Royal Bank of Canada's Senior Director of Global Strategy and Planning for Corporate Real Estate. She oversees the innovation and planning of RBC's global portfolio of about 24 million square feet. Susan Black is the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Conference Board of Canada, Canada's leading independent applied research organization. We look forward to a very robust discussion today, but before I ask any questions, I'd like to invite each panelist to make a 5-minute opening statement introducing both your organization and giving us some high-level insights with respect to the impact of COVID-19 on the workspace and what types of changes you envision in the future with respect to our workspaces. We'll start with Andrew and then move on to Joanne and finally Susan. Andrew Reeves, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you. This is it's an honor to be here and be invited to have a chat with everybody. Yeah, I'm Andrew at Linebox Studio. I guess over the last 10 years or so, we've designed quite a few spaces for Shopify, Element AI, Georgian Partners, GSoft, all through Canada. And we're excited to be a part of what is the new. Some of the things I like to say is that we know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, but now it's the exciting opportunity to rethink it all and relook at it all and see maybe just how maybe the human condition can be relooked at, spaces that are maybe kinder, more comforting, more secure, more grounded, but all with a performance based of what it is to work and the human conditions that are overlaid on that, especially these times where we're all remote and we're all separated. I think the humans love to gather, nest, socialize, and be inspired. And architecturally, on my side of things, how we can play a role in that and rethink it all and make sure we kind of build back better, as Biden says, at a political level. Maybe we can do that physically, both with spaces and urban planning and just how we connect and work together. So we're curious, and I'm curious to see how all this pans out and the questions and where all this goes. And the rest of the panel here is, I'm intimidated, to be frank. There's a lot of super bright people here, and I'll ramble and listen and hopefully provide our perspective.
Joanne?
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, hi, thank you. Echoing some of the sentiments, so very pleased to be part of the conversation today. As mentioned, I'm responsible for several strategic centers of excellence, bringing together leadership, research, and data to develop innovative and effective, efficient, cost-efficient, but that's changing a little bit these days too, for RBC's portfolio of 24 million square foot globally and an annual occupancy spend that translates to about 1.7 billion Canadian. So large portfolio. It is an enterprise function, so I work in partnership with our regional leadership teams who are accountable for the real estate relationships with RBC's business platforms. And I mostly focus on the office portfolio. In periphery, we support some of the retail world where retail shares space with office. I think our perspective is the pandemic has absolutely challenged our assumptions about how and where we work and accelerated the need for us to focus on employee experience and flexibility to drive a more dynamic approach to designing and managing our workplaces for optimal efficiency. We believe that there are many benefits to be gained as we reemerge from the pandemic, and RBC has established a dedicated future of work and culture team led by a vice president in HR to reimagine where, when, and how employees will work in the future. It's a real intentional shift to looking at work first, real estate second. Real estate is definitely a critical enabling partner with HR and technology to support the enterprise program. We provide guidance on standard arrangements while providing enough flexibility within those arrangements for businesses to have choice and control so that we can help them achieve their outcomes. And we expect that some of the changes as we emerge from the pandemic will be an evolution over time. We're not going to emerge from this pandemic and be in the future of work, essentially. That's really the message. First, we see we have to safely return to our premise, get people comfortable with going back to work. They've been out of the office environment for a year plus by the time we go back. We then see a bit of a transitioning to new hybrid ways of working. And then ultimately that will result in the future of our work, which we think will continue to be an ongoing testing process over the next several years. I think RBC's leaders are very passionate about, we want to do this right. And if we do it right, it will increase our diversity of talent, improve our employee engagement, and lead to an optimized portfolio of space in terms of size, utilization, and cost.
And Susan?
Well, thank you for having me today, and it's wonderful to be on this panel with everyone. As you mentioned, the Conference Board of Canada is the largest independent research organization in the country. We cover 9 knowledge areas, so economics, education, health, a few others. Our work is very much knowledge-based. We produce research and we produce events where people come together to share insights and ideas and so on. We're headquartered in Ottawa, and prior to the pandemic, 90% of our employees were in Ottawa, and we owned our building there. We built it in 1984. It's about 44,000 square feet. So I thought I'd take a few minutes and I'd tell you our pandemic story, because today we are a virtual first organization. So last June, about 3 months into the pandemic, we made the decision to transform ourselves into a virtual first organization and to sell our office building. It was a big decision for us. It is a permanent decision. We aren't anticipating bringing people back into the office to be in a cubicle or at a workstation 5 days a week. We do anticipate, though, we will need and we will want hybrid space, if you will. So we're going to need space to bring people back for team meetings, group meetings, and so on. But we've really spent the last year pivoting to becoming virtual first. So I can take a couple of minutes and just tell you how we made that decision, why we made that decision, and how we executed on it. So if you think back to the beginning of the pandemic, everybody was enormously concerned about the health consequences. We didn't really know what it meant. So a lot of stress also, certainly with our staff, on what's going to happen with our children, if they're in school, they're out of school. There's a lot of uncertainty and anxiety. At the same time, our management team, like I think many other management teams, was spending time to figure out how are we going to bring people back in? What are we going to need to do to the building? Are we going to put arrows on the floor? Are we going to have a scheduling app? We also realized, as I said earlier, we are knowledge-based. We're not a B2C company. We're not even, when we have our funders or our members and whatnot, we can meet with them virtually. One of the pivotal things we did is we actually surveyed our employees at the end of March. And what we found is that over 90% of them wanted to work from home at least part-time. In fact, 80% they had to, they'd be comfortable working there full-time. Where it landed was 53% said, ideally, I never want to come back into the office. I want to be home. And 46% said, I'd like to come into a workplace 2 to 3 days a week. So that was a huge eye-opener for us. So at that point, of all this reflection and thinking hard about what is the work we do and how do we need to do it, we said, okay, building's on the market. We're going to put all our energy into being the best virtual first place we can. I will tell you the decision wasn't easy. We have a corporate value around evidence. We think it's really important to look at your data. And so that helped us make the decision. And I will say we acted quickly, but it was still hard for people early on to wrap their minds around it. So I'll take just another minute and I'll tell you how we did it, because it's a huge change management challenge to morph an organization like that. We were already in a cultural change in terms of pivoting our employees to be very focused on performance and much less focused on tenure as a mechanism of your worth, or on visibility as a hallmark of how well you're doing or how you're contributing. So we were already journeying towards being very performance-based. The other thing that we focused on in terms of change management, we said we've really got to elevate our connections. So we did 4 things. We over-indexed on employee communication. We hired an internal communications manager. We already had a comms department, but this person does nothing but internal communications. For the first few months, we met with all staff, all 170 people, every single day at 9:30. We had a huddle for 20 minutes every single day. We now do it twice a week. And we do lots of other small connecting events. We do trivia challenges and Friday cocktails, and we do something we call Cup of Camaraderie. The next thing we did is we really used our employees very extensively to figure out what it is we want to do. How do we design? So we had 6 working groups last summer. They had 87 recommendations, many of which we put in place. Third thing is we are putting a great deal of investment into upgrading technology. So for a small organization, that's always a challenge, how much money to put in, but we're putting in hundreds of thousands into things like financial software, performance management software, better tools. And the last thing I would say is we are also ever more mindful of our employee value proposition and what we can do to enhance it. And I think that speaks to, it touches on what Joanne was saying. So we have upgraded our pension offering, and we now offer a joint sponsored defined benefit pension plan. We've increased training. We've gone, as an example, U of T, we're bringing in their graduate level qualitative methods course. I actually have gotten more heavily involved myself in onboarding. So I do the employee orientation the first Wednesday of every month for 2 hours. I do it and I meet every single new employee. So we're learning. It's not easy, but what we take away and what we're very optimistic about is the decision we made, which was right for our organization, given what we do and who we have there, has allowed us to focus on our strategy, has allowed us to upgrade our skills. There've been some really positive people outcomes. So, as an example, people tell us now that everybody's remote, everybody feels they're on a level playing field because we have been forced to really, as I said, over-index on communication. There are people who have been with us for years who say they know more about the conference board now than they ever did. For me, the most interesting outcome has been, I mentioned earlier, 90% of our workforce was in Ottawa. That is now down to 76%. In fact, out of the last 50 or so hires that we've made, 57% of them are outside of Ottawa, and they're spread across the country. So it's been a great opportunity for us to upgrade our talent pool. So that's what we did. That's how we made the decision, and that's how we've been executing it.
Thank you all for that introduction, and you've certainly given us quite a bit to unpack. So I'm looking forward to asking a few questions. I'd like to start with the area of remote work, given that's part of our most recent experience. And Joanne, this question is for you. Given your global mandate, this pandemic has resulted in a global and large-scale work-from-home experiment. And I'm wondering, how has this remote work transition affected your long-term projections with respect to the need for physical space, your commercial real estate strategy, your brick-and-mortar strategy? And also, I'm hoping if you can expand upon, given your global mandate, were there unique challenges and opportunities with respect to the Canadian real estate market that you didn't see elsewhere?
Yeah, happy to answer. So, as stewards of the real estate portfolio, which is the third largest cost between people and technology, we are always looking at our real estate footprint. And we've been on a journey for several years to evolve our workplace strategies, first from flexible work to activity-based work, and that's global in nature. There are some nuances in terms of regional differences or variances, but really activity-based work, smart buildings is something that is global in our portfolio. And we take the opportunity to build that when we're making real estate strategies in specific markets. I think what the pandemic has done for us is it's just accelerated the adoption of flexible work. Leaders are more interested than ever in understanding how the workplace can support the employee experience a little bit better, how it can be used to drive down some of their costs. And we call ourselves the most popular kids in school. Like, we feel very fortunate. Everybody really wants to talk to real estate to see what have we done in the past, what are we doing in the future, and we're almost having trouble keeping up because things are changing so quickly. What we see going forward is the office is not going to go away. We will still have a bricks and mortar strategy. There is definitely a desire on both the employee part and the leadership part to return post-pandemic, and have a dedicated office space remains a priority for both groups. Absolutely, there is a need for increased flexibility. We don't expect people will go back, the way they did before, commuting downtown 5 days a week, but generationally it's different too. We also have the employees that were based downtown, living in small condos, starting their career, that also want that culture and connection that the office offered to them. And so it's definitely a place we see for onboarding, learning, collaboration, team building, social gatherings. We just think it will be different and more distributed. And it's really valuable for us that the leadership has seen that work can happen anywhere. That really has been really insightful for most people. If you think about real estate, it's a cost that's just ongoing, right? Long-term commitment, this is how much I pay on an annual basis. It's not something that people believe they can really influence. But now there is an ability to influence some of that costing. We also think the pandemic gives us the opportunity to address inefficiencies that existed before the pandemic, because let's be real, People did work from home before the pandemic. There was flexibility. It's just that real estate didn't keep pace with it necessarily. So we would observe spaces that were underutilized. Everybody needs to have a desk, but they're only sitting in it 50% of the time. And they may be in the office all of the time, but they're not sitting at a desk. They're collaborating, they're moving around to different spaces. So there's definitely an interest in addressing some of those efficiencies. And we've got some data, because we've been on this journey for some time, that can help inform what a new workplace would look like inside of the bricks and mortar. So we do expect that we will optimize our footprint over time. You know, it's unrealistic to think that, you know, increasing flexibility, allowing people to work from home, creating distributed work hubs will not have an impact on our bricks and mortar strategy. We are not in a position to make statements to say we want to exit markets, we want to reduce our footprint by X amount. We just want to make sure that we use the opportunity to, you know, really develop strategies that are smart and reinvest money that we might have been spending on dead space in a different way. Creating, you know, investing in technology, not just in meeting rooms anymore, but throughout the floors, at people's homes, etc. So it's really about a shifting away and having an appropriate spend against the assets that we have. But there's no question in our minds that bricks and mortar is here to stay for us. And it will be an ongoing learning experiment over the next couple of years as we look to make it more flexible, more fluid, and strategically invest our capital where it makes sense.
Now, I appreciate your point that bricks and mortar is here to stay, and it's unrealistic to think that this pandemic will change that. But I'm wondering, I'm going to turn to Andrew, and hopefully, Andrew, you can give some insight on the issue of the home office, because this transition to virtual work has put a spotlight on the home office, and I'm wondering what unique design considerations are there when working from home, and what are the types of changes the residential market, namely houses, condos, rental units, will have to make in order to adapt to this new demand for home office space?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's. I think as an architect, I think you have to listen. This is what a great forum. I think just keep listening. And we, I think, are challenged with designing things that respond to the new human conditions and the new norm. But I would like to zoom out. I think there's a micro macro type look at all this stuff. And if I can for a second, zoom way out and talk about how cities and urban planning must solve this as much as the office space itself, and much as work from home. I think a great city and a great space promotes the greatest opportunity for accidental moments. And in those moments are where special things foster new businesses, new relationships. Maybe the new is a return to the old traditional Main Street. And I hope I can connect all these things as I go along. But the old traditional Main Street and community-based design was just as much about the office as it is about a city. Currently, and maybe why some of these surveys that larger offices have taken, why the reaction of working from home is so strong, is because currently neither, I'll use a large city as an example, currently the situation is a typical person is alone with a coffee in hand, gets inside of a square box, which is your garage, gets inside one car to drive 1 hour, then to arrive to maybe a subway station to get in a metal tube, then get to a metal box that takes you up metal floors to a shitty office that's surrounded by a cubicle that's made of fuzzy walls. Your experience through the day is nothing but metal, non-human interaction, non-tactile environments. There's no opportunity for walking, hiking, none of those things. So what we're doing for Linebox, and I call it a great pause of the last year, of everyone has rethought and rethink. We challenge ourselves to look at those things and question everything. So I think there's two models. There's the suburban and the downtown model. Both need to focus on the 15-minute walkable community. And neither are divorced from those things, and both have opportunity for those things. The suburban model, which we're working with right now with Canada North and Hub 350, is what can we do in a suburban model to reintroduce that exact same journey as I explained Now, how about you wake up with your kids, you walk them to school, you walk them to work, you walk them to what was a strip mall, now is empty spaces because retail has now exited from those. These strip malls now are in suburban locations that are extremely walkable. So maybe there's a little hub inside there, maybe there's a little butcher, maybe there's a little Italian coffee shop that you hang out with. Maybe it's about buying stuff that's local. Maybe it's about batch furniture makers. Maybe it's about looking around you. Maybe carbon footprint is right at your front steps. Maybe it's meeting the person who just came out with the coolest app. And these little hubs that now are situated in your neighborhoods. And we don't need to talk about downtown, suburban, what's right, what's wrong. This is your neighborhood, this is your established. We can't fix those things, but we can correct those things. And then maybe downtown is more about a short bike ride with your kids, not alone. And maybe when you arrive at your building, that building now has a school in it, it has daycare in it, it has office in it, it has a little pub, it has a little vertical town. And what we describe suburban model, downtown model is tiny town. All the little elements that make a good, thriving town can be and exist in all these different spaces. And then now you don't mind those commutes, you don't mind those things. And in coming downtown, now has an energizing moment of a baseball game, of a hockey game, which if Ottawa or whatever gets shit together would make this happen. So your downtown becomes something that you look forward to for these special events, these special moments. And maybe that building can have a retirement home on the top floor and a kindergarten on the ground floor. So your grandmother can meet her grandchild. And while you're working there, you're secure and you feel good and you feel supported and you're in an environment that you actually want to show up to. And I just think all these things are just healthy and good. And if you reverse everything to just being verbs and forget about style and plastic and arrows and all those things, describe every company, describe what it is to be human, you know, what it is to interact, what it is to relax, what is to be, what is it to sleep. All these things are one, interesting as an architect, universal. You don't need to speak to demographics, age, race. We all like things, and architecture has the ability to foster and grow and inspire and play a part in those things. And I think everything has a place. Your home has a place, a hotel room has a place, restaurant has a place. Now, how can we wrap it all together? And frankly, COVID didn't cause these problems. COVID exposed what was wrong, in my opinion, all along. But I'd rather focus on the positive and think about like using this moment in time to correct these things. And I always talk about, I grew up in Toronto and lived there for quite some long. It's the amount of people on the roads now, the amount of people on the 401 now is right. That's the way a proper city should be. But unfortunately, the communities from Mississauga, downtown, all these things do not have the supporting cast to allow for this to happen. But it's sitting right there in front of you. And I think we need to see that before we zoom into the, you know, maybe down the road we'll look at office itself. But I think we got to start with the bigger picture first. That needs to be corrected so that those horrible conditions don't apply, that you're alone in order to come to a metal box and a metal place. It's, we need to fix that.
That's, you know, that's a great insight. And certainly this pandemic has caused us or given us an opportunity to rethink some really fundamental issues about our priorities and our experience. You know, I'm curious, in some sense, when people go to work or go to the office is somewhat of an equalizer. You got the same broadband internet connection, you have, you know, similar office spaces, whereas not all home offices are created equal. I'm wondering if you know, you have some insights on that with respect to, you know, your concerns around equity with respect to remote or virtual work environments and some design considerations there. And I'd also like Susan to give some insight there, given that you are an organization that has moved to a virtual first strategy. You know, where does equity considerations come in? Because as you know, this pandemic has certainly highlighted some of the inequalities in our society. And what should organizations or designers be thinking of or doing to ensure that remote work doesn't increase disparities in, say, class, race, and gender?
That is a huge point, and frankly, in the last year, I've noticed this, in my opinion, kind of getting spiraling out of control. To be honest, decision makers. What I've noticed in larger companies now, decision makers are management level. Those management levels make a certain amount of money. They have a certain amount of environment. I have my cottage. I have a house. I have my maids. All those kind of things. So of course, working remote has that comes with it. I caution this new norm to make sure it's not just a survey. Make sure that you have a real deep connection with who you employ and who works for you. There is a place for everybody, and everyone deserves a place. So you might have to make sure that the young intern at 20-year-old has his place. The introvert who doesn't necessarily want to be alone, he doesn't want to talk to anybody, he doesn't want to be alone, has his place. The 25-year-old bachelor, recent immigrant is living in one-bedroom apartment with his mom, has his place. Everybody deserves their place. And I'm very concerned about the future of offices and the separation of class and who gets what. So then if you are going to be working remote all the time, how about that? Are you going to pay for that person's desk, that person's camera, that person's acoustics, the right environment for them to be in? Are you going to pay for them to upgrade their apartment to get a bigger space so they can have those spaces? Are you going to solve the mental health problems that are occurring? And everyone knows of this thing. In our small little 20-person office, we witnessed it personally, how the struggles of these things and how different levels of wealth and those things have directly impacted people's opinions. So I would caution all companies, small, big, to make sure your panel is filled with the right people of all levels of your company, not management, C-level decision makers. Those are people that actually are well off and privileged, frankly, and maybe their tools are set up properly to keep this going. And again, I very much applaud, and our office too is very much about being flexible when we come back, working remote and those things. That is 100%. There's no doubt. It's not arguing about all in, all out. It's a hybrid solution, in my opinion. I think that has created an insane amount of opportunity. But I caution, very much caution, with this great change that we do not cause long-term harm. Architecture has that, a great ability to inspire and create healing, healthy places, but also has the opportunity to do the opposite. And we got to make sure if you go all in and work from home, you better be all in. And all in means making good all over the place, not just your personal place. That's just my overall caution for people listening in.
And Susan, given that you have that experience transitioning to a reverse strategy, how does equity play into that policy?
So I'll pick up on some of what Andrew said. Clearly people have different setups at home. They live in different parts of the city, the country, where bandwidth may be strong, may be weak. So you've got all those things to consider. I think a couple of things that we did that I think helped is we did give a very generous stipend for everybody. We did allow everybody to take all their equipment out of the office. Their computer monitors, their chairs, like whatever they had, we said, take it home with you. It's yours now. Go ahead. We will be providing that kind of financial support on an ongoing basis. And I think that'll be true for most companies who are going to take, as we will, a hybrid model ultimately, where you're not having people come back in 5 days a week. It becomes quite apparent particularly if you're an organization like us and you do as much communication with employees and you see your whole workforce on these Teams calls and that who's got access and who's a little weaker. And I think we've been, touch wood, fortunate. Most people, well, I think virtually everybody has the access they need. I think the other reality is that, we're becoming more tolerant of the challenges that everybody can experience with bandwidth cutting out at the most inopportune times, with people being challenged learning how to have a visual presence all the time and so on. So I think there's learning there. I do think that where my concerns would go to is not around, do people have the right tools and that we can solve for that with money and with, providing hybrid space. My concerns are really more around, in the absence of having a lot of physical presence with people, you don't get the community the same way you got it. That's a real challenge. And I think that picks up on what Andrew said. You don't see people day to day, you don't see them physically, people come across on a camera differently. So finding ways to connect virtually is important for mental health. I think is something we're going to be challenged by for a long time. As I mentioned earlier, we do a lot of small, short team activities across the organization. I mentioned we did a survey. That was one of the pivotal pieces of information, but we used our employee groups to tell us exactly what do you need. We had dozens of people in the organization come together and say, here's what makes sense for a policy here. Here are the resources that we need technologically to be able to do it. So I think the caution I would give companies is that that's not a one and done. As the world around us evolves, you have to keep going back to your employees and you have to keep engaging them in the working groups, doing the surveys, having the regular conversations around what does it look like for you today. I think it's particularly bad right now because in Ontario, at least with the lockdown, there's no other outlet for people. So the isolation that has been caused by this is worse than it would be if you were working. The isolation that results sometimes from remote work is worse now because at the end of the workday, you can't go to the bar and be with your buddies and get some social interaction there. So I'm hopeful that when that lightens up, people will have some relief there and we'll come back into balance because I think, to step back and zoom out, this is a massive global social experiment in telecommuting over the last year. And I've done a lot of work in my prior life around diversity and so things like work-life balance come up. And, there was a huge core of resistance around whether you could really telecommute, work a compressed work week, or do that. I mean, all those naysayers for years had said, that person that does that, they're not committed or their work isn't really good. That's gone. Like that's one of the big, I would say pluses for everybody right now because we've proven it works. Companies don't die off. They don't implode. In fact, many companies, depending on what sector you were in last year, did very, very well working remotely. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here to keep an eye out on things like inequity and to continue to iterate in the moment and take the pulse continually to see how do we pivot next? How do we move a little bit over here to make it better?
Thank you, Susan. Joanne, I wanted to pivot, to borrow a word, to commercial real estate. But before I do that, you did mention the employee experience in your opening remarks. And perhaps you can touch on that subject first. What types of considerations has RBC given to the employee experience as they work with this hybrid model of both coming back to the office eventually and embracing virtual work?
Yeah, so we were very lucky that our technology was strong enough to support a shift to virtual work quite quickly. As Susan mentioned, we did provide a provision for employees to purchase some things to make them ergonomically safe while they were at work. Some technology was deployed depending on business platform. Some technology was taken from office. And I would say more from a management perspective, I think there's been an intentional shift for leaders to engage with employees because they don't have the opportunity to engage more spontaneously when in office. So I would say around the management routine piece is where we're investing a lot of our time. We've done several pulse surveys hearing from the employees throughout the course of the pandemic in terms of how their experience has been. There's been a huge emphasis on health and well-being, specifically mental health. Different business units have put out ways to connect virtually around yoga at lunchtime, just connections that are social in nature, connections that are wellness in nature. But I would say our biggest shift has been, really, it's in some ways removed a hierarchy. Executives in office are often in office and behind closed doors. And depending on your relationship with that individual or what level in the hierarchy you sit, you may not get the chance to interact as personally as we have had the opportunity to do during COVID. We haven't experienced too many issues with people having inequitable setups at home in terms of access to internet and the like. And when that's the case, it's really just been a transparent discussion between employee and manager to resolve that issue. But overall, I think I would say it's mostly in management routines and removing hierarchy. And people, to be honest, are worried about going back to the office and returning to some of that hierarchy. They like the realness. They like the connection that they get to have face to face with somebody on a call that they might otherwise not have.
Can I pick up on that? Because I think there's an important insight in there. And that is that the demands on management, I think it's requiring managers to be much more intentional and much more disciplined and much more focused. And that's always harder. So in some ways, paradoxically, it is more work, not just because, we're seeing studies now that say you get a little crazy if you look at yourself all day on a screen, but because you've got to be thoughtful about who and how you're connecting as an organization and as an individual manager. So I think that's a change. I think that will be a change for the better for people who like to manage and who are meant to be managers. And the second thing I would pick up on what Joanne said about the hierarchy is, and I think I mentioned this or alluded to it earlier, one of the most surprising things for us were people who said they felt people who are outside of the Ottawa or outside of the traditional office worker who really felt they were equal now because everybody was on the call at the same time, no matter where you were. And that's a big difference, which we had underappreciated. And I think you'll see more of that. I can imagine a workplace where even when some folks are in the office or in the hybrid space, if others are outside, the norm becomes everybody's doing it virtually, just so that you don't have the privileged inner group being in the physical space. So even if you're there working on other things, the meeting is still held virtually. I think we'll see those kinds of norms evolve.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, we've gotten. Go ahead, Joanne.
I was just going to say they have to evolve for the success, or we'll quickly sink back into pre-pandemic ways of working, which is what we all don't want to do.
Yeah.
Most of all, the employees, right? So yeah.
We've got considerable engagement from the audience, and we have a number of questions. Hopefully, we'll try and get through some of them. First, I'll direct this one to Joanne. Eventually, we'll be going back to the office, or some of us will be, and some are more eager than others. And I wonder, some experts have posited that we're entering one of the most pro-tenant commercial real estate markets. Do you agree with that? And if so, what are some innovative ways that organizations can position themselves to strategically fill some of these vacancies?
Yeah, I think it's easy to think that. And the answer is really, it depends. Real estate leases are long-term in nature, right? So we've been out of the office for a year. 1 year is not going to determine necessarily the next 10 years of our commitment that we've already made. It might change that in some ways. So we believe the opportunity is really about volume more than anything, how much space we need, less about rate. Rate definitely does play a role. In Canada specifically, we are absolutely seeing in the office market a vacancy increasing across all major markets and some of the smaller markets as well, especially in urban centers. And that's really just driven by people putting some excess space they believe they have on the sublease market. It's by others declaring some structural vacancy. So that's definitely increasing, and there's minimal new leasing activity. So people aren't willing to make some long-term commitments. On the flip side, if you have any industrial type space, that's booming. That vacancy rate is lower than it's ever been. And I speak to that because we do have some operational type centers that do sit in these types of markets, and we are seeing rates go up there. Double-digit rates, in fact, and not a lot of new construction. And e-commerce is really fueling the demand for some of those spaces. So it really is, and it depends. Similar trends we're seeing globally. I think the biggest drivers regionally for space in our experience is really what the business unit requires. So a wealth management function, a cash operations function is very different from a knowledge worker function. So that's where we're seeing differences in kind of space type. What I think landlords should do, this is just me with my ideas, I would turn it on its head. And I would challenge themselves with, how can they put themselves in a tenant position and think about how would they offer things that we're trying to build into our own space, like distributed work hubs and footprints, like more hospitality and amenity spaces that can be leveraged, that can also be have technology that we might use in that space as well, not just landlord provided technology. How do they repurpose legacy elevator lobbies, reception spaces with just traditional seating to make them more collaboration spaces that would avoid me as a tenant being able, having to build some of that stuff myself and have that ultimate commitment. I think the last thing I would leave with is for our landlord, people will be making investments in spaces. There are offices out there that haven't been touched in 20 years. They are cubicles. And that has to change. And smart landlords will partner with their tenants to help enable that investment to really increase the value of their properties. I'm not even go so far as to think, does a lease need to be confined to one space? Can a lease be scalable? Can you have, space in 2 different buildings that can flex a little bit? I think about that in my portfolio book. I would love it if a landlord would think about that as well. And then you sort of come together and negotiate the best solution for both parties. So I think there are innovative things that landlords can think about and do. And I would challenge them to address the same concerns that or challenges or roadblocks that their tenants are facing. How can they offer that in a way we don't have to provide?
And Andrew, if you can touch on that as well, what I'll do is I'll just combine 2 questions here on that very note. One asks, is there room for innovation to make it easier to transform commercial real estate into other uses? So on that point, is it possible to transform that space? Is it a straightforward process? And the other question is, why aren't more Canadian business leaders aware of and utilizing third workspaces, flex offices, co-working, and designing their new workplace strategies? So if you can briefly address those, that'd be great.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, my thesis was based on taking a vertical tower and turning it into a tiny town. So that little tower had all these potential for accidental moments, right? So you go to school there, you have a drink at a pub there, you live there, and you work there. And as you're transcending and descending those things, you run into these different people. So as people coming home, you run into people leaving, and all these things. So it becomes a livable lungs. It's like when you're going down waterways, right? You have the eddies that are pullover spots, and you have the extreme downhill. So those are high stress, high energy, high performance, and then you have eddies that pull over. And I think all these things need to have those things. I would question some surveys and those kind of things, and kind of getting back to real spaces. I would question surveys because how they're questioned and how they're asked. So I get a good chair and buy some things for people. But if you haven't really questioned the human condition and the environment. So Linebox were born through houses, and our intro to office spaces was about bringing the home condition to the offices, which 8 years ago, which 1 million square feet, so now it's come full circle. But that comes with proper lighting, proper acoustics, proper environment. You can't solve a proper environment with a good chair and a good table. And I would challenge thought leaders and C-levels and decision makers to spend a day in a basement bachelor apartment, which are 1 year, 2,000 employees. Spend a day there with the right desk and the right chair. Does it have the right lighting, the right acoustics, the right environment? The answer is no. And what percentage of your employee makeup doesn't have the privileged space around you that's a good home? So is it corporately responsible that you provide those spaces? And maybe because your survey is off, and maybe because your offices were shit, and your investment prior to this for culture and spaces was not an investment. It was a cost that you just made spaces for bums and seats, and you didn't really actually commit. And now you're caught, and you have to now double down and commit neither to at home and make your at home super awesome, or these hubs or hybrids super awesome. But it's time to do a bit of reality check and kind of double down on what you really believe in as a corporation versus just numbers that you can delete off your spreadsheet. It all could work. It all could be horribly bad. It could be all horribly good. And I think everyone's hinted at this at these moment in times that you can create a lot of harm, or you can solve a lot of things that we haven't really addressed so far is mental health and conditions of people that a nice desk at home with 3 kids that are screaming at you, or in-law living with you and sharing a space that is half the size that you need to be in. Those things don't solve those things. So I fundamentally believe, obviously it's super biased as an architect, that you need to have those places to retreat to, and you need to have those spaces that are kind, that are comforting, that are good lights, good air, good quality. And unfortunately, like everybody's been mentioning, is that the current spaces today don't provide that. So that's why no one wants to go to that office tower, because it's a horrible space. It's not that no one wants to work together or be together. Humans gather. Humans want to be inspired together. Humans want to hug each other. These are innate qualities that will never leave. And unfortunately, we might be overreacting to the real condition that is now. Our built world, if someone came and said, okay, I want 100,000 square feet tomorrow, it's 2 years out. So you need to think about what's down there, not what you're doing right now. And anyone in the build world knows that you want to find a space, lease a space, build a space, those kind of things is a long-term commitment, which is super scary for somebody to say, okay, this is what I think is going to happen in 2 years or a year from now, when we're so caught up in what is now and the realities of now and people dying and all this craziness that we're bombarded with. It's a super complex situation that, and this is what such awesome panel is, that I think that's what you need. You need all these different inputs from all these different levels. And then you hopefully, as an architect, if it's my world, I can design around those things, as long as you can set the social norms and try to keep open lens for everybody. You know, but it's I ramble sometimes, but sorry.
Well, those are really great insights. And I think, you know, I was hoping Susan can pick up on that point, and we have time for one more question. You mentioned, Andrew, that humans gather, humans want to hug. These are obviously things you can't do in a virtual environment. So I wonder, Susan, what advice would you give to an organization who's considering a virtual first strategy? And how do you address that concern that there is a premium on sort of in-person social interaction?
Well, I think I'm going to go back to what Joanne said originally is, you know, we're never going to get rid of offices forever. And as an organization that has, you know, done that change, I would say we're still very clear that we are going to come back and find some kind of flex or shared space, because people need to come together for, you know, first, just to get sometimes teamwork done. You need to see your colleagues, you need to have brainstorming sessions, and there are all sorts of other things you need to do that are not as easy or as effective virtually. A lot of things you can do better virtually, some things you can't. So we know people need to come back in groups together from time to time. The second thing is, we know there is a you know, the spirit, the innate desire and need to gather and to be part of a community in society at large operates for organizations too. You know, build your culture around a community, what it means to be part of an organization. So one of the things we did when we were in person always, and I'm sure RBC did this, and probably your organization too, Andrew, is you have celebrations, you have rituals, and they are fostered in a physical space. So even if you were an organization that was going to go virtual and never come back, never have flex space, never have anything, I would still say you need to plan those events where you bring people to a meeting room, a hotel, it's a half day, it's a conference. Like, you have to give people those opportunities to connect physically. So they see each other, they feel each other, they touch each other. You know, how many times have we been in situations where you meet someone, you've done business with them for a long time, but you've never met them physically, and you say, oh, it's nice to put a face to a name. That's so important for us. So depending wherever you are on the spectrum, if you're coming back 5 days a week, you're never coming back, and even you're not even going to go hybrid, I still think you need to build in occasions to bring your groups, your community, your employee community together. And that would be the advice I would give, is to plan for that. The second thing I would say, and I would pick up on Andrew, you know, we're thinking a lot about, we're starting to think a lot about what is that flex space we want so we can have these team meetings and so on. And I do, you know, I think one of the things coming out of the pandemic that we wonder will be the death of the cube farm. we could just, put that in the grave and say it's gone. So spending time in what makes physical space appealing is very worthwhile. I will say my last employer, as I was Holt Renfrew, and as I joined them, they'd just done a $10 million renovation on their head office, and the space was all open. Nobody had an office. I didn't have an office. I was an SVP. But boy, was it beautiful. And when people came, they could gather in the community with the different sofas and whatnot. That stuff really is important. It relaxes people. So whether you do it as permanently, you do it as part of Flex Space, you do it to celebrate. I think considering that, and not everything has to be slick and hard, is a good thing to keep in mind going forward.
Well, thank you all. I mean, we have so many questions here and simply not enough time to get through all of them, but I'm sure that our audience has left with some valuable insight with respect to this issue and a number of points of conversation. And I'll give the floor back to Heather Bakken.
Oh, wait, so we have to do our draw first.
Excuse me. So as we indicated at the outset of our program, we have a draw for the Ottawa Business Journal. I'd ask one of our panelists, Susan, given your mic is not muted, to pick a number from 1 to 300 for the draw.
252.
252. So congratulations to attendee 252. You have received a free subscription to the Ottawa Business Journal.
That's terrific. Thank you very much, Awais and Susan. And to all of our panelists, Susan, Andrew, and Joanne, for sharing your collective expertise with us today. And I believe the visionary and evidence-based solutions. I just want everybody to know that I am personally going to be moving to Tiny Town. To all of you watching, thank you for your time and for your interest in this critical conversation. We hope you will take away the valuable insights and actionable information to apply to your decision-making as you plan for the post-pandemic work environment. That's the goal for all of our events at the Canadian Club of Ottawa. Again, today's event has been made possible by our amazing, generous sponsors, RBC Royal Bank, Shaw Communications, Welch LLP, Strategy Corp, and TD Bank. We are grateful for your ongoing support. We'd also like to ask you to join us for our next event on Wednesday, May 12th. It's an extraordinary event with Amazon Web Services, also known as AWS, on modernizing immigration in Canada, also related to, how Canada moves forward in the business and, citizenry communities. We're also hosting another event after that called The Ties That Bind, Investing in Charitable Organizations on Tuesday, May the 18th. Please visit our website at www.canadianclubottawa.ca to see all our upcoming events and to register. And with that, I'd like to thank you for sharing your time with us, and be healthy, stay well. Thank you.